Okay, we're going to get started. And once again, welcome to our program titled Engaging People of All Ages in Transforming the Encore Stage of Life. This program is jointly sponsored by the Encore Network and its intergenerational affinity group. My name is Jim McGinley, and I'm active with both the network's program committee and our intergenerational affinity group, which is led by Clint Wilkins. The Encore Network is a coalition of leaders who champion the civic, social, and economic contributions of people 50 plus by creating community, stimulating learning, and inspiring action to transform the Encore stage of life. And we're excited to bring you this program today. You can find out more about us, including how to become a member at encorenetwork.org. I'll be the facilitator for this 75-minute program. We added an extra 15 minutes to our normal timing to allow for more interaction with our panelists and all of you to learn how to take action on the ideas that are generated. The key word in the title of the program is engaging. Our goal with this program is to identify steps we can take as a network and as individual members to create a multi-generational workforce. We want to bring into focus the clear benefits and potential obstacles of creating greater age diversity in our work and building coalitions across age groups to support our efforts. The agenda starts with a panel including Dr. Cal Halverson of the Boston College of Social Work and also an Encore.org research advisor who will provide a brief update on research he led titled Co-Generation, Is America Ready to Unleash a Multi-Generational Force for Good? Cal will be followed by Sharita Harrison, co-leader of Metromorphosis, whose remarks will include her experience with intergenerational leadership models and team building. Caitlin Cromit, founder of Dreamcatchers Foundation, will then relate her experience of starting her work at an early age. These days, she is a motivation speaker, author, and consultant to companies on how to succeed in the modern multi-generational workforce. Then it's going to be time to turn it over to you. Everyone is muted since we've got a big audience, so please place your questions in the chat box as they occur to you. Michelle Gahey and Shana Pittman-Frank from our intergenerational affinity group will be monitoring the chat and directing questions to the panelists. We want to hear your questions on how to take action in your own organization and lives to engage with a multi-generation workforce. We also want to hear about your successes and challenges in doing this. We've allocated about 30 minutes for this session, this part of the session. While all this is going on, Tim Leibarger from the Encore Network will use his mind mapping skills to capture key comments and will summarize his findings towards the end of our session. We'll share Tim's findings sometime after the session. We'll have a brief wrap up, including upcoming Encore Network and its affinity group programs, along with our one question poll asking for your feedback on today's program. This event is being recorded, and we'll send an email to all who registered for this event in a few days with a link to the recording. So we're ready to start. Cal, please take it away.
Okay, thanks so much, Jim. I'm really glad to be here today, so thank you for the invitation to join. My name is Cal Halverson, and I'm an assistant professor at the Boston College School of Social Work. I'm also a project lead at Harvard University Center for Work, Health, and Well-Being. And I have a 15-year history with Encore.org that, for the sake of time, I won't get into today, but suffice it to say that I'm a big believer in the power of Encore careers, and as you'll see today, co-generational work. So let's get started. I won't get into the nitty-gritty details about the methodology, but I do want to stress just a few things. I'll be talking today, of course, about this new cogeneration survey that we released in June in partnership with Encore.org. And one of the things that makes this survey so good is that we used what experts consider to be the gold standard panel in survey research called the AmeriSpeak panel from NORC at the University of Chicago. And this panel is designed to be representative of the US household population. We surveyed more than 1,500 people between the ages of 18 and 94 who resided in the US in March of this year. And we asked respondents about a range of issues, including their interests in, experiences with, and barriers to working with people older or younger than themselves to improve the world around them. And we got a ton of information. The first area I'd like to highlight relates to generational divides. And looking at the headlines, we'd think that this is a very big deal. But our survey, in fact, found a very different picture. We found that people of all ages want to work across generations to help others and improve the world around them. In fact, more than 4/5 of respondents said that they want to work with others 25 years older or younger than themselves to improve the world around them. And as shown in the top bar, well over half strongly agree that America can better solve its problems if younger and older people work together, and nearly the rest somewhat agree. And as shown in the bottom bar, just over half strongly agree that we would be less divided as a society if older and younger generations worked together more often, and nearly the rest somewhat agree. But let's turn to the what. Older and younger people want to work together on some of the same issues, but there are notable differences by age and race. As shown in the bar chart, more than half of Gen Z and millennial respondents said that they want to work across the generations on mental health, which did not make it into the top 5 issues cited by boomer or silent generation respondents. The environment came first among older generations, but was also a top issue among younger respondents. And education was the only issue that all generations included in their top 5. When considering race, both education and mental health were among the top 5 issues for all racial groups, but some differences did appear. Black respondents cited racial justice more than twice as frequently as white respondents did. Healthcare and caregiving was cited by more than half of Asian respondents, but only about 1/3 of white respondents. And housing and homelessness was cited by more than half of Black respondents, but fewer than 1/4 of Asian respondents. So what's holding back this multi-generational force for good? Despite the strong interest in working across the generations, fully half of respondents cited a range of obstacles preventing them from acting upon it. And COVID-19, of course, was a top obstacle. And surprisingly, all but the oldest generation stated that they don't know how to get started working with people of different generations as a top obstacle. And this is shown on the bar chart on the screen. All generations selected that they can't find opportunities to work with people of other generations as a top obstacle too. Yet I would like to stress one thing. More than half of the sample stated that nothing prevents them from working for change across generations. Further, nearly 9 in 10 respondents agreed with the statement that they would like to spend more time with people of different generations who are not in their families. So that was a lot. And again, you'll find more details in the report, a lot more details in the report. But I do want to cover a few implications to consider for your own co-generational initiatives. First, the interest in co-generational work is out there. While over 90% of respondents interested in working to improve the world around them stated that they would like to do so with people much older or younger than themselves. Second, and while there are certainly differences by generation and race when it comes to key issue areas, there is a lot of overlap too. Education and the environment are great examples, and for most issues, there was still a good portion of each group interested in them. And third, our results were clear that among those who had worked co-generationally for the social good, their experiences were very positive. So in a sense, you try it and you like it. Now, extending upon the data, these results highlight 2 important threads. First, age diversity is one important factor among many others, including racial, ethnic, gender, and socioeconomic diversity to consider when designing programs and recruiting members. And so we hope that this report gives you cover, so to speak, to make that case. And second, simply placing people of different generations together won't necessarily lead to positive results. Intentionality in creating co-generational programs may lead to better outcomes for your programs, as well as in reducing age bias and discrimination in the long term. So to learn more, you can visit encore.org/cogeneration. I know this was also linked to in the event details when you signed up. And from there, you can download the report and see the reflections of Mark Friedman and Eunice Lynn Nichols, the co-generational co-CEOs of encore.org. And lastly, I do want to invite you to check out the data for yourselves, now available through the Boston College Dataverse. You can get free access to the data set, the survey questionnaire and the code book, and much more. And feel free to contact me if you have any questions about how to do that. And so with that, I should say, don't feel you have to memorize or write down this link here. We can make sure to get this link to you as well. And so with that, I'll pause here, and I'm going to take a moment to ask our co-presenters if they have any questions. So Sharita or Caitlin, I'm curious if anything I covered from the research made you think about your own co-generational work, or if you have any other questions or reactions that I can answer before we move on. And so I'm going to stop my share, and there you go.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cal, so much for sharing that information, and to the Encore Network for having this conversation, because something that I find very interesting, and Cal, you referenced it early on, is that there is this kind of pervasive narrative about this generational divide. And from the looks of the data that you presented here, that thing just does not exist. And so I'm just curious, where do you think that narrative comes from, that people don't want to work across generations?
Thanks so much for the question, Shrita. You know, one of the things I've noticed is it's easy to talk about this generational divide because there are differences, you know, between older and younger people. Differences do exist. And when we asked people about potential barriers to this co-generational work, you know, notable variables did exist. I didn't cover all of them just in my quick 5-minute spiel, but one of them that was especially apparent among younger respondents, particularly those who were in Gen Z and a little bit with millennials, was that they aren't quite sure how to communicate with people who are much older than themselves. We also found, when we asked a question about values, was that both kind of a bookended approach. So Gen Z especially, as well as silent generation, were the most likely to say that their values differed from people who were either much older and younger than themselves. Although what I was struck by is people kind of in the middle, especially Gen X, that didn't seem to bother them at all. They didn't think that their values differed very much from people much older or younger than themselves. So, you know, there are issues there, and I don't want to, you know, paint such a pretty picture to say that this is super easy. But in general, people actually do enjoy working with and look forward to working with people older and younger than themselves.
Thank you, thank you. And so I'll just share that is very similar to what we find in the work that we do. And so I'm Sharita Harrison, and I have the privilege of being one half of an intergenerational co-leadership team at Metromorphosis, which is a social enterprise focused on community change and racial equity. And my partner at Metromorphosis is a 66-year-old veteran community warrior, right? He served in our state legislature. He's led state departments, run nonprofits, and he's nearly 35 years older than I am, and yet we work together to lead this organization and lead these meaningful, what we find meaningful community change initiatives in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And we do it through this intergenerational co-leadership model for many of the reasons, Cal, that I think you just lifted up in this research, right? It started as a way to address these really, really complex world challenges that we saw in our city, but we wanted to do it in a way that was inclusive. A way that harnessed both the knowledge and the experiences of the younger generation, but also made use of that knowledge and experience of the older generation, because our older people in our community have been around for a long time. They've been addressing these challenges for years. And what we found was that young people really, really cared about some of these same issues, and they just kind of wanted a way in. They kind of wanted a way to also work on that. And so we started thinking about ways to bring them together. And one of the ways that we started to think about this is through leadership, right? And so whether or not that's organizational leadership or informal leadership through community associations, neighborhood associations. And so we started really thinking about matching people along interest areas. And so if you were interested in education and you wanted to see education different, here's this really, really eager young person, and here's this really, really knowledgeable and eager older person. And how about y'all have a conversation? And so that's really how our intergenerational co-leadership model kind of organically evolved. And since thinking about this work in that way, we have been able to really, really not just like bring people closer together, but really get to the heart of what the challenge is and really come up with some unique solutions. And so I can honestly say that our work around intergenerational co-leadership really does support this data here that you're sharing. Caitlin, I'm interested because I know that you have done work from 15, I think it was, right? From your youth. I'm really interested in your perspective. Do you kind of see that there is the desire there? And it's just a matter of the how, or what are you seeing?
Yeah, thanks, Sharita. Really inspiring, the work that you do. So thanks for being here. Hi, everyone. So yeah, to answer your question, definitely. And that was actually one of the things that I was going to bring up in a question to Cal as well, is kind of we saw a lot in the last 2 years, really an uptick in interest working co-generationally. And I think a lot of that stemmed from COVID. I know there was a lot of emphasis on like bringing communities together and really being a resource. I know there were a lot of news stories, media surrounding, the isolation and loneliness of some of our older generations, but also of our youth, right? I think that was really hard for them going through COVID and having to be on Zoom for school. So we saw a real uptick in that. And I'm curious, Cal, in your research, I know it was earlier this year that you did the research, but did that come into play at all? Like if this has been more of a recent conversation that people are having more and more because of the events over the last couple of years, or was that not really brought into it?
Yeah, in full disclosure, we didn't ask about different points of time during the COVID-19 pandemic, but one thing that did strike me that relates to your question, Caitlin, is the fact that so many people, especially younger respondents, noted that they really don't have very much interaction with people who are of very different ages to them. And so in this survey, we talked about people either 25 years older or younger than them. So when we're talking with Gen Z, there is no one 25 years younger than them. So in that case, we're just talking about 25 years older. But they didn't have very much interaction with these people who are much older than younger than themselves. And importantly, in the follow-up questions, they stated that they actually would like to have this. And so in light of the pandemic and the social isolation that you talked about, and you're absolutely correct, there was a lot of press, and importantly so, about social isolation in older adults, but it is very much there for younger people as well. And especially I'm thinking of my own students on the Boston College campus. I saw it firsthand. They talked with me about it. They felt isolated, especially during a lot of the stay-at-home orders. And so some of that may have come through just due to the timing, because this was in March of this year. This was just coming out of the first Omicron variant. But people in general were still out and about. So it's hard to tell how the pandemic at that point in the pandemic affected these results. And I would be curious if we were to do this survey again to see how it changed.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. Well, thank you for that. I'll give a quick intro of who I am. So my name's Caitlin Cromit, and I run an organization called Dreamcatchers Foundation. We work with youth in high school and college to basically connect with older generations in their communities through fulfillment. Our primary activity is fulfilling end-of-life dreams of hospice patients. So typically these students will start clubs at their high school or college, and we'll partner them with a local hospice, and they'll actually fulfill these dreams. So it's similar, we like to say it's like Make-A-Wish, but kind of flipped on its head. So that's one of the ways that we connect generations. We also have our students doing activities and different things. Like I brought up during COVID, what a big thing that we had our students and our and basically older generations in the communities doing was a pen pal program, which I know was something that a lot of groups did and pivoted to during the pandemic. And so it was like the most popular thing ever among students at that time. We were finding so many were interested in doing that. And I think, like we just said, it kind of, the benefit went both ways. It was really the students wanting to do something, wanting to serve, but also I think we're receiving so much out of it by having these pen pals in different communities. We partnered with retirement communities across the country, assisted living communities, and things like that, where, you know, it was a little bit harder to connect with during that time. And so so that's basically what Dreamcatchers does. And I think my experience comes from, I started Dreamcatchers when I was 15 years old, and I was volunteering in a hospice in my community and saw that there weren't a lot of opportunities. Like Cal mentioned, there's really not a ton of opportunities at that age to connect with much older generations than yourself. And that was always a big interest of mine. And so worked with a hospice to identify some of their patients who had had these end-of-life dreams, maybe that they were talking about at that stage in their life. And so that's kind of how I got started fulfilling these dreams. And it gradually spread over the last 13, 14 years. And now we're a national organization with chapters all over the country. So it's been really cool to see from both ends. And that's really what I'm passionate about, is keeping our organization run by young people so that they can be the ones kind of at the forefront of making these connections. And every time, you know, we have a new chapter start, a big thing that the students mention is, I've never heard of anything like this, and I've never seen an opportunity for myself to get involved with people older than myself. So I think that's kind of where the need is, as we've seen in this report, and this amazing research is really bringing to light that there is that interest. There just might not be an ample amount of opportunities at the current moment. So that's why we're here. Thank you. So I think I'm handing it off to Jim to kind of bring in some questions, maybe from the audience. We're all happy to take questions and also go into more depth on this research.
Yeah, thanks, Caitlin. We're anxious to get a few more questions. We've got one in there. Perhaps before we go to the Q&A, we're really running on time. In terms of your work, Caitlin, beyond Dreamcatchers Foundation, can you talk a little bit about your experience with the business world and the involvement in a multi-generation workforce from that point of view?
Yes, definitely. So I got started doing this work a few years ago after I wrote a book on working with millennials as a millennial, and kind of helping to destigmatize a lot of the generational stereotypes that exist. And so I was really seeing that was really prevalent among all generations. It's really being shaped by the media, by public opinion of what generations are like. Stereotypically, and it was really impacting the way people work together. I even had someone tell me one time that their solution to this whole millennial problem was that they were just never going to hire a millennial because they didn't like our generation. So that was kind of a big red flag for me. And the reason I kind of got into this is kind of going into companies and helping them better understand each other rather than their generational stereotypes, and how to work together better. And so it's been really cool to see coming into companies, even universities, faculty will bring me in for retreats. And what we'll do is just kind of do exercises that bring to light kind of the truth about generations and how we operate. And then talking about the best ways to work together based on, you know, each of our backgrounds and our unique history and unique world that we all grew up in at different times. And the common, I guess, response at the end of some of these is that, you know, a lot of these people just didn't realize what other generations were like. And so they were really happily surprised that they were not as difficult to work with as they thought. So I think some of these stereotypes can get in the way and cloud our judgment, but also cloud our actions and how we respond and work together. And so I think really just having those conversations and being intentional about it, which was something that Cal brought up in the research too, is not just like throwing people in a room and saying, great, co-generate, but rather bringing intentionality to it and bringing some ways to actually have those conversations that are productive and lead to these solutions and better ways of working together. So that's been really cool to see. Thanks, Jim.
Well, thank you, Caitlin and Sharita and Cal for sharing your perspectives. Cal, it's great to see the research shows that there's genuine interest, and great to see Sharita and Cal talk about their on the ground implementation, if you would. So Michelle, perhaps we'll turn it over to you to get us started with questions that are appearing in the chat, and between you and Shana, keep us going for a while.
Sure. So I would love to start off with Doug, and Doug has a bit of a layered question around that pandemic conditions and also bridging divides. And I would love it if we could let Doug on mic, and maybe you can ask that question at a deeper level, Doug.
Well, my question is, it's one thing to acknowledge the fact that loneliness and social isolation are issues. But I'm wondering if the factors that contribute to loneliness and social isolation don't make it even harder to make the kind of connections that we're talking about. And the question really is, what do we find works? I mean, what are the things that enable us to clear those hurdles?
Thanks so much, Doug. Nice to see you again, by the way. One of the, in my area of research, so some of my research touches on co-generational and intergenerational programming and initiatives, and another part of my research focuses on longer working lives and how we can make it easier for people to work as long as they so choose. And in that regard, one thing I've noticed in my work with older workers is that just the opportunity to be in the workplace and not face the age discrimination if they're unemployed or underemployed in trying to find a new job. Once they're there, there's been so many researchers who have documented, and I have too over the past couple of years, just the value of actually getting back into the physical workplace and having that social interaction and just talking a lot, around the water cooler or just those simple things that we kind of take for granted, that once you're out of that situation, how isolated you can feel, and then the negative repercussions from that. And from my own students' standpoint too, when we were all teaching on Zoom, I was trying as hard as I could to make it engaging and interactive and to have one-on-one meetings over Zoom with the students. And it just wasn't the same for what they needed. And so I don't know if this actually fully answers your question, Doug, but you're right. There are some of these structural issues at play. And the more we can build structures or processes or programs or policies or whatever that get people together, even if it's just socially, that hopefully can build onto bigger and better things.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. A lot of my work is about these connections in the workplace, but I'll say first of all that we actually have several blueprints in our communities for generations working together. I mean, families are intergenerational, right? Homes, houses, people live intergenerationally. They socialize intergenerationally. For those of us that attend places of worship, those are typically intergenerational. And so we have blueprints and we have models for how the generations work together. As it relates to the workplace though, and Cal, because you brought up kind of this desire, I think, for both older workers and younger workers to not face this discrimination. One of the models, one of the reasons that we use this intergenerational co-leadership model is because it creates a space where both of those people can exist together, right? And so when you think about this need to be intentional about structures that support bringing generations together, when we in the workplace, one of the things that really does separate generations is the ability to move up or to occupy positions of leadership. And so when you then put in place this co-leadership model that intentionally brings younger and older people together, then you get rid of that, right? And so what that looks like for us at Metromorphosis and for some of the other places, and again, Encore.org has adopted this co-generational CEO model. What that looks like is then rethinking what we think of when we think of experience and wisdom, right? Because that wisdom and experience exists across ages. And so my grandmother used to comment sometimes that a certain young person had an old soul, right? This idea that a young person seems like they have wisdom that's beyond their years, right? And so I was having this conversation with Eunice. And so if you can understand kind of this concept of an old soul, then we can kind of understand that young people have this wisdom to bring to the workplace, right? Which in no ways cancels out the wisdom that older people have just by the nature of being able of doing things and having a length of time or a history with the particular subject matter. And so a lot of times in the workplace, we see that separated and even pitted against one another. But imagine what that looks like when that's brought together, drawn together intentionally, and how problem solving and decision making becomes more productive, not just for the work in the organization, but also for the people, right? And then I'll say this, and then maybe I'll be quiet. There was a question around any corporations, examples of corporations that are bringing the generations together. And yes, Metromorphosis for one, Encore.org for two in this co-leadership model, but there are also organizations that are really embracing the concept of affinity groups around age. And so they bring people together, not unlike Encore, the Encore network, right? They have younger people come together, they have older people come together, but then they've also created an intergenerational one where people from different generations come together and share their experiences around this. Seen this with a few different organizations that we've consulted with. And so again, it really does come back to it's not the desire that's lacking. It's not really really the opportunity. It's the how, the designing, the intentional designing of ways to bring those generations together. So yeah, sorry.
Well, another example of that, Sharita, since you were talking about the question from Tom Wells on examples of organizations and corporations doing this work, is in it's a couple of years old now, but in the Harvard Business Review, there was a whole article in 2019 on creating shadow boards that include younger employees. So speaking of intentionality, these are corporations that are choosing to create new basically boards within their organization that purposely have younger employees, with the idea being that combining the ideas and expertise of the younger employees with, of course, the expertise of the employees who have been there longer, you can create something even better and more innovative. And so I'll drop that link into the chat as well.
Great, thank you for that. And Carolyn, I see you have your hand up, and I just wanted to continue on this thread for just one more second, asking about like how it's interesting, and a lot of nonprofits are also starting to think about creating the shadow boards or advisory boards with younger members and bringing those together. And I'm wondering, in all of your work, all three of you, and Cal, in your studies, have you encountered resistance to actually the co-generation work, or even some fear-based resistance about if we go with one, we'll lose from the other? And has that come up any at all? And if so, how are you addressing that?
Yeah, I can say something real quick on that. I've definitely seen that, and I've heard from people who have maybe been with a company longer, have more of a legacy there, if you will. They have sometimes expressed, that it's not fair to have someone that is younger be able to be in kind of this similar position or this advisory role because they don't have that level of experience. And so on my end, I try and mediate that by reminding that it's not really about the level of experience, but it's about kind of bringing in the new innovative ideas and how that could change or at least, help improve different aspects of the company or the organization or the culture in general, just being more accepting of these different viewpoints. So yeah, I think there's definitely pushback. I've seen it mostly from those who have maybe been with a company longer and are a little bit more hesitant to bring on someone who's newer. And so, yeah, I think just really making that conversation about bringing in different ideas versus, we see them, as having the same level of experience, but it's more different experiences.
Yeah, I'll agree with Caitlin. I've definitely seen some of the resistance for those same reasons, both in older and younger generations. So older people have been resistant because they don't fully trust that younger people have had enough time to wrestle with these difficult concepts and decisions, right? And then younger people don't fully trust that their perspectives will be fully accepted by older people. And that's one of the reasons that I think advisory councils are helpful, but they also might need to go just a little bit further, because if you think about this advisory board, I can reject or accept or reject what the advisory board kind of comes to me with, right? Which, depending on if you are, and if you have an advisory board of older individuals, which we had for a while at Metromorphosis, we had it's become an official thing, an Urban Elders Council. We had this advisory board, but really it was just to get the input. What we really wanted to do was convey the notion that both perspectives are needed to make the decision. And so we do away with the advisory piece of it and really just try to integrate it into our everyday decision making and our everyday board. It's the same way, I think, with the leadership, and the reason why we adopted the co-leadership model, because you can always have the different perspectives informing leadership decisions, but until those are placed on equal ground, you're always going to kind of have that small level of mistrust that one of the perspectives is not being fully, taken seriously. And so we just kind of wanted to eliminate that. But for sure, shadow boards, advisory groups are a great first way to get started. But to your point, there is some of that resistance that I think can be eliminated by intentionally putting people on the same playing field.
We have a question that is, I think, really personally very interesting to me from Mick Smyer. He's talking about climate as an example of particular areas of concern, and we've talked about how the intentionality of just like co-generate, go and bring people together is overwhelming. And for those of us who work in the field and think about this a lot, it's overwhelming because you want to come up with particular things. And so one thing that I hold in my mind a lot of the time is having intentionally intergenerational organizations or group who think about this, and people who are out in the field in these focus areas, whether it's around voter registration or climate or education, who might be doing co-generational work or intergenerational work, and either they don't know it or they haven't really thought about it that way, or opportunities for them to do this in ways that we can kind of infiltrate their thinking with our perspective to kind of galvanize their work. And so I'm curious where your minds go with that. And in specific, also Mick asked, sorry if you have background noise from my coworkers, if you have examples of co-generational efforts to respond to the climate crisis, if we see organizations and efforts that are happening through the climate work specifically, and we can expand to other topic areas too.
Yeah, thanks so much, Shana, and for the question, Mick. From I'll cover 2 points here. From the survey, just looking at the data, we actually asked about 2 different issues just out of curiosity to see if people responded differently, but they're linked. One is we asked them about their interest in working co-generationally for the environment. And then 2, we asked about their interest in working co-generationally related to climate change. And what we noticed was that depending on the generation, people responded differently. And so among the oldest respondents, so specifically for the silent generation respondents, over half mentioned that they would like to work co-generationally for the environment, but only about 40% said for climate change. When you looked at the younger generations, they're actually a little bit more even. For Gen Z respondents, they were nearly identical percentages who answered for climate change and the environment. And so I think what this showcases is that many people are interested in similar issues, but sometimes it's just the language that we use that might target or people may respond to differently. But thinking about co-generational examples, this is, I'm actually just going to throw it back to the work of Mick. I was in this great fellowship with Mick and got to know him, and he's doing phenomenal work on co-generational climate action. And so one great organization to highlight here is just Growing Greener, that actually works with teachers and students in elementary and high schools, honestly, to help students move from anxiety about climate change to action. And so they've been doing some great work. So I would check out Growing Greener, just as an example.
Great. Thank you for that, Cal. And let's go ahead, Carolyn, thank you for being so patient. And let's go ahead and let you ask your question.
Okay, it's not really a question, but it's a comment.
Or comments.
And now that Shauna has driven it to environment, let me go back to where I wanted to make a comment about the intergenerational workforce. I think it's an extremely important thing. And in my situation where I am, my supervisors and my boss could be my grandchildren, actually. And we have talked about this. We have talked about this, and they are wonderful in that they are open. They are open to wanting to work together. And I certainly am open to wanting to work together. And we figured out, yeah, Carolyn, you're pie in the sky, you like to do things, big things and etc. And whereas my cautious younger workers are more, well, no, we can't do that, And so we sort of worked together to be open, which I think you have to have in any kind of a co-generational, intergenerational workplace, is an openness and a desire to get the end product of a good product, of a good result of why you're there. And it's not just for making money, or just not say, oh, I know all about this. You don't have to tell me that, or, oh, wow, you did that. Wow. It's an openness wanting to make a good product. And I find that very, very, very important. And a second little thing, I just have to tell you, I was like monitoring, mentoring rather, a little group of high school students. And I was the older person, and they were very shy and very afraid. And I said, well, why are you shy? And they said, we're afraid of old people. I said, you're afraid of old people. Why are you afraid? I don't know. I'm just afraid of them. They walk slow. They're not very friendly. And then, I went into my spiel about, well, when you have aches and pains and everything, etc. But anyhow, we started a dialogue again, and they were enlightened. And it's that desire to make a friendship co-generationally and intergenerationally that has to be there. Otherwise, it's not successful. The end.
Well, I'll just say, I think what you're talking about, Carolyn, I think the dialogue is important. I was just reflecting on, we know there's, for example, this is just an example, but there's a shortage of election workers. And so I volunteer as an election worker here in Boston. And at our latest primary a few weeks ago, I was there for the first time. I'd never done it before. And I was kind of in the middle of the age spectrum. And a couple of the volunteers were Gen Z because their college professors had actually encouraged them to volunteer. And then one of our volunteers, she was retired, and we were talking about what she wants to do next with her work life because she still wanted to work. And I knew the least out of everyone, and I was in the middle of the age spectrum there because it was my first time there. I learned so much from the youngest volunteers who had done it before and the oldest volunteer. And the amount of dialogue that we had, and we were making jokes about, different pop culture references that we didn't understand and all that, but we were able to teach each other things and get to know each other.
Yes.
Learn where we lived in the neighborhood and trying to identify all that. That was really nice. And we all had a great experience in what could have been a very stressful day.
That's right.
I have a question for all of you around trust. One thing that's been a recurring theme in my work intergenerationally and a lot of this has come up with younger adults who are dealing with climate work and older adults who are looking at voter registration and voting, where there is a lack of trust that the other younger or older generations share their priorities. We talked about values, but I've had many older adults over the years talk about low voter turnout for younger people. And I've had a lot of younger people really feel that older adults don't take climate change as seriously as they do or feel the urgency. And so I'm curious so we talked about building relationships and the need to bridge things just by focusing on social relationships. Is there data to support? People throw a lot of data that actually supports this feeling or articles around mistrust of the generations around topics like this, but do we actually have data that doesn't support that? Or if you have, I'm curious if you have any comments about this, because this is a barrier I see to some of the co-generational work that has happened in my neck of the woods.
I'll mention briefly the data I know about, but then toss it to Shrita and Caitlin, who have more on the ground experience probably with working through trust in different communities. But we know that looking at trend lines, trust in institutions is historically low. Multiple institutions. I've had to write this in some of my own papers, but we do actually trust our friends, and in general, we trust our neighbors, the people that we can see, that we can talk to. They're not an institution. They're just a person. We tend to trust those folks a little bit more. But I'll admit that's the depth of my knowledge on this area.
And I guess that goes back to Mick Smyer's approach of building those relationships and conversations around an issue like climate change with people you know. Does anyone else have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I'll just say really quickly, something that I bring up in a lot of the workshops that I'll do across generations is the fact that, and I can't remember what exactly this research was, so I can't send you a link or anything, but it was around the fact of that a single instance of a single conversation, a single interaction can eliminate ageist stereotypes between two generations. And so I always bring that up because it's so shocking that a lot of us haven't even had that single interaction. And I think a lot of that mistrust comes from just judging. It's similar to stereotypes, right? Like we're fed all of this from the media and from what we read and what we see online and hear from people. But I think when it comes down to it and having that single interaction or conversation can really eliminate a lot of that mistrust that is kind of built up in our heads over time through stereotypes. So anyway, I know not really data-based, Shana, I know that's what you wanted, but that's the best I got.
No, it's still very helpful.
Yeah, so you know, Caitlin, I would say that that's important data, right? That's qualitative data, right? And so experiences matter. And I say that because so I was having a similar I was having this conversation with my partner Raymond about trust, and he said something to me that felt very, very profound. I'll share it with you all. He said that trust is a product of relationship and capacity. Right. And so trust comes from having these relationships, which we've already said, and being in proximity with people and getting to know them and understand them. But it's also a product of capacity, being able to see people's ability to make something happen. And so when you think about it like that, I think a lot of the trust or mistrust that we're seeing is because people are separate, or they're not building those relationships. They're not having those conversations, Carolyn. They don't have that openness, but also because they haven't seen yet what the other group can do, right? And so young people have this mistrust maybe around older people because they have not yet seen what they believe are good attempts at addressing climate or the environment or that kind of thing. And then older people have the mistrust for the younger people because they haven't seen what they think are good attempts, right? And so I think again, it's simplistic because doing this is difficult, but the answer really is putting people together and letting them do the work. When we hold people back, we never ever get to trust them. Think about the people that you trust in your life. You trust them because they show up, they perform in a certain way, and you can count on them. Well, if we never give people the chance to perform in a certain way, we'll never be able to trust them. So I think that's where that mistrust is coming from, is that we don't really have real opportunities, or I shouldn't say that we don't. We do. We have lots of opportunities for generations to work together. But I think what happens is we have so many instances where people of all ages aren't really able to show what they can do, and so to the other generations, and so that's where that mistrust comes from.
Okay, thank you. That's interesting, Sharita, how you're talking about trust, and all of you have been talking about trust and building that trust between generations. And it takes me back to Carolyn's comment about some of the younger people saying, well, we're afraid of olders. And Rick had a good comment here that said it's a good sign that young people say they're afraid of old people. There's truth there, and the truth will set you free. So in that context, we had a question here also around built companies and how they're incorporating co-generation hiring practices into, but often those practices are focused on bringing younger people into companies. But then if we think about, say, tech companies in Silicon Valley and a lot of that, it's mostly a younger workforce, millennial and younger. Has there been that any of you have seen any initiatives geared toward bringing older people into these companies, people with a different type of experience to come in and sort of shape the workforce in that way?
I have done a little work. I'm not going to remember too many names, but a couple of years ago, for example, I spoke at the Argentum conference, which is for senior living builders. And there were actually quite a few organizations there that were specifically looking to hire older workers. And they gave a variety of reasons for why they were doing that. But sometimes it was because that if they were hiring older workers, they may have just through their own experience and where many of them are in their lives, they may just have more empathy and more feelings of understandings of what other older adults are going through and what their lives are like. And so that was one of the reasons, but I can't remember the exact names of the companies. So.
Mm-hmm. And Caitlin, do you have a comment there? Have you seen any of these initiatives or any ideas or thoughts on that?
I haven't really been part of those conversations, but I think there's obviously a lot of value in that, and there are a lot of initiatives going the other direction, right? Trying to bring in younger people to companies that maybe typically have older people. So I think, I mean, it only makes sense that it goes both ways. So I like it.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead, Michelle, and plug encore.org, right? Because there's the program for organizations can host older individuals that have all of this experience. And so as a nonprofit, and our nonprofit is relatively young. I mean, we have now 50% of our people are Gen Z. And at one point I thought I was the youngest person on the team, but now that's not true. But there are a lot of skills that you earn over a career, right? And so regardless of what field you've been in, there are a lot of skills that are very, very useful in a number of ways. And so Encore has the program where they will match older workers with organizations based on those skills. And so maybe you've worked in corporate America, for 25 years, and you have all of this finance experience. Well, a nonprofit can certainly benefit from 30 years of finance experience, right? And so Encore has a program that matches people in that way. But I think we need more, right? I think we need more of those kind of structures built in. Because we are working longer, right? We are living longer and we are working longer. The Stanford Center on Longevity did an entire series around work and how people aren't just the days of us working for 30 years and getting to the age of 55 or 65 and then just going home and I don't know, doing absolutely nothing. Those days are over, right? Like people are giving back, they're contributing, they're working longer. And so as a workplace, we're going to have to figure out how we manage that. How do you have someone who is capable of working into their 80s and someone who is just now 21? Those people are in the workplace, and how do you make room for those people? And so I think that's something that we're going to have to think about, and programs like the one at Encore that is intentional about bringing in older people in newer places, but also programs that are intentional about putting younger people in places. I mean, we're going to have to figure that out. It's going to be something that we need to come up with within the next 5 years, because we're at that point now.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Sharita. It's definitely ongoing work. And for those of you who are interested, Sharita is talking about the Encore Fellowships program. And what we do, it started off as people who were looking for their Encore career, their second act after retirement. And Encore has a very robust program that takes people with years of experience and places them within nonprofit and social innovation work with organizations. So if you're interested in that, please put your information in the chat and we'll connect you with the Encore Fellowships team. But I think you're very right. It's like people are not, as you say, the old model of retirement, retiring and going home and sitting in their chair or going on cruises. People are still active and innovative and want to share all of their experience. So finding ways of taking advantage of that, I think it's going to be very important work in this next ongoing decade. So I think do we have any more questions? Or, oh, Caitlin, there was a question directly for you. And the question was from Lewis. How do you recruit your students and match them to the organizations that you work with? It's a pretty specific question, but we have.
Yeah, I can answer that quickly. We do a lot of outreach to schools, student activities, offices, that type of thing within high schools. And then within colleges, we do a lot of recruitment through programs or schools that have like nursing programs or social work programs, kind of tend to be the ones that are more attracted to this sort of opportunity, at least with our hospice connections. And then a lot of it is actually word of mouth. I would say like 90% of our students come to us from referrals from other students, which is always a good thing. And then we connect them through, we do basic searches We say, if there's a new chapter starting in West Covina or something, we'll say hospices near West Covina, retirement communities near West Covina. And then we'll just do outreach, and they're always on board, which is really great, because they're always excited to work with younger generations. So that's definitely telling that a lot of them aren't also given those opportunities as well on that side.
So Michelle and Shane, I think I'll jump in and thank the panelists for responding to the questions. Thanks to all of you who posed questions, and there are some other comments and questions that didn't make it into our time slot, but we'll share the chat as well as the recording. And it's time to move on to Tim Leibarger of the Encore Network to share what he has captured from the discussions using his mind mapping expertise. And those of you who are involved with the Encore Network 50 Plus Employment Affinity Group know of Tim's skills with this approach. So Tim will take perhaps 5 minutes, up to 5 minutes, to share his feedback, and then we'll ask the audience, including the panelists, if there's any major points that he should include, and then we'll work after the session to come to a final mind mapping conclusion. So Tim, take it away.
Good, thanks very much, Jim. So just as a reminder, what I do here is try to capture the high points. There can be differences in language that maybe is not entirely accurate, but the idea is to get a general summary of what people have contributed. And then I export this into a Word document, goes out to everybody. You can use it as a framework to modify where it's helpful. So number one, just to capture some of the benefits early on, Cal, you shared a great advantage here is that people of all ages have expressed the desire to work with what I call other aged. And there's a desire to spend more time with others of different ages. And there are opportunities out there. Notably, there was a desire to work on mental health as well as some other areas that maybe I didn't capture. And we can go back and modify this with your input. There are some basic conditions that you talked about. One is that simply placing different ages together doesn't necessarily work. Putting people in the same room with age differences may not get somewhere without a shared focus. There's concerned care about similar issues, but the different generations may have different perspectives. And that's a positive, an opportunity if we can transcend or communicate about those different perspectives. COVID was a shared experience that brought generations together. So there was a shared experience that we all had, and created a reason to interact in some different ways. As a grandparent who helped oversee our grandchildren with their virtual learning, that was a specific example of it. Challenging on all sides, I might say. Trust is a product of conversation and capacity. So I'll say a little bit more about trust here in a minute. Now, there are some obstacles. COVID-19 itself is an obstacle. While it was a shared experience, it also created barriers between contact between people. Also, this concept that media drives stereotypes came up a number of times here. So we can maybe too readily accept what we hear across the media and have that influence how we see the different generations. Also, that there is a lack of interaction between generations, but it is desired. So it's not the desire that's lacking, it's the how to do it. The motivation is there. The understanding of how to do it is what's lacking. People don't know how to get started. They have difficulty finding opportunities. Also, some are not sure how to communicate with people of other ages. Again, some of this may be media driven, expectations that we put on other people that may not be necessarily accurate. There are differences, can be differences in values between age groups. We may not share similar investment in values. We talked about climate change versus environmental and different understandings of what those things mean. Lack of trust was an interesting part of the dialogue here. Older may think that younger lack the experience, and as perhaps as a result, younger think they won't have their ideas listened to. Underlying that lack of trust, there are some fears. Younger fear olders, lack of understanding. And I put in here, I feel it's fair play that olders may also fear youngers. Again, a lack of understanding of the experience of the others. Intentionality, a word that was used much here, can feel overwhelming to make happen. How do we actually take action on that? Also, loneliness and isolation is an issue for perhaps older folks, fewer opportunities for intergenerational contact. So under opportunities here, again, intentionality around matching people along areas of interest. Again, different perceptions of what we mean by environment and climate change, but there's going to be some shared interests there as well as other areas. Build relationships and conversations. I love the idea that a single conversation can change stereotypes. It doesn't have to be long, perhaps a little more than just brief, but those conversations are what make the difference. So creating opportunities for interaction, examples given, the Dreamcatchers Pen Pal program. And then also, Cal, you mentioned the poll workers. So shoulder to shoulder with people working on stuff where we can interact with them. Love to the conversation around leadership models. The idea organizations led by younger people to drive the interaction. And then co-leadership, a couple different examples of that. Shadow boards of younger people to observe, learn, and offer insights. Advisory groups to bridge the lack of trust. So we build in structurally these age differing groups and where there can be interaction without a feeling of being forced in a way. The destigmatization of generational stereotypes. You mentioned the workshops and working together to break some of those stereotypes, and then creating opportunities for older people to get back into the workforce, helps break the isolation. We note that people are living longer, will continue working and being active longer, and then put people together and let them do the work. And I put in here a shared focus as well to reinforce the fact that just getting people together doesn't necessarily make the magic happen. There has to be a shared focus for why we're together. So that's what I've captured. And what I'd like to do is open this up for your conversation. We do have a poll that's popped up there. Am I the only one who saw the poll?
Yeah, the poll has popped up, and so people can fill it in, but let's respond to Tim while you're doing that. Any thoughts that you think should be added to Tim's summary?
Modifications you'd like to make? Anything you feel I captured the wrong way?
I'll be quick. I think that was fantastic. I've actually never seen this done before, so I learned something new just from you, Tim. At the very beginning, you mentioned mental health. I would just add education to that, because education was unanimous among all generations. Thank you.
Thanks, Cal. Anybody else?
Mick has his hand up. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, no, go ahead. I was gonna say I have something, but also Mick has his hand up. That's what I was gonna say.
Thank you, Tim. This is amazing to see you do this on the fly. I would add a couple of quick things. I think there was also a common interest in climate issues, whether you label them environment or climate. And secondly, I don't think it was a values difference on climate. I think it was a language difference. Generations described it differently. When you talked about climate change versus environmental issues, different generations respond to that. But some other research that I put in the chat shows there are no generational differences in concern and worry and acknowledgement of the climate issues. So I don't think it's a values issue. I think it's a language issue.
Good feedback. Thank you. Well, Tim, I think you get the prize for active listening today. Thanks a lot for sharing this with us. And we'll now move to wrap up with Clint and I. So Clint, please take it away. Clint Wilkins, are you unmuted?
Great program. Kudos to everyone. I'm Clint Wilkins. I'm the convener of the Intergenerational Affinity Group with Encore Network. And our next program, regularly scheduled, second Tuesday of the month at 9:30 Pacific time, 12:30 Eastern time, will be Matt Kaplan from Penn State. Matt is the professor at Penn State of intergenerational programs and aging. And Matt's been in this field almost since the creation. He's been doing it for 35 years. He will be doing our program on essentially major trends in this field and what's next. So it'll be a dialogue. Matt's going to set the stage. He will be sharing his vast experience. So if I noticed that a lot of you on this program today are, I don't think, members of Encore Network. If you want good programming like this in the intergenerational arena, plus in the Encore arena, just go to our website and sign up. I think that's all I have to say, Jim.
Okay, Clint, thank you. So finally, as we conclude, we noted earlier that this session has been recorded, and we'll send you a link in a few days so you can refer to it, share it, or listen to it again. The next Encore Network program is on October 19th, where we'll be learning about and determining our role in the National Partnership for Student Success, an initiative to mobilize 250,000 caring adults to help struggling students come up to grade reading level coming out of the pandemic. More details to come. And as we mentioned at the beginning of this program, this session was designed to stimulate action. So we intend to check back in a few months with Encore Network attendees on action that has been taken, and learn from each other, and have a monthly program a few months out that highlights what people are doing, what people have done. So look for that. Finally, thanks so much to our panelists and all of you in the audience for a lively, interactive time together. And we look forward to your success with creating greater age diversity in all your work. Have a great day.